Mrs. Burling. Arthur! As Mrs. Burling shows signs of interrupting. Burling. Yes, my dear, I know. I'm talking too much. But you youngsters, just remember what I said. We can't let these Bernard Shaws and H.G. Wellses do all the talking. We hard-headed, practical businessmen must say something sometime. And we don't guess. We've had experience. And we know. Mrs. Burling, rising, the others rise. Yes, of course, dear. Well, don't keep Gerald in here too long, Eric. I want you a minute. She and Sheila and Eric go out. Burling and Gerald sit down again. Burling. Cigar? Gerald. No, thanks. Can't really enjoy them. Burling, taking one himself. Ah, you don't know what you're missing. I like a good cigar, indicating the decanter. Help yourself. Gerald. Thank you. Burling lights his cigar, and Gerald, who has lit a cigar, helps himself to port, then pushes the decanter to Burling. Burling. Thanks, confidentially. By the way, there's something I'd like to mention. In strict confidence, when we are by ourselves, I have an idea that your mother, Lady Croft, while she doesn't object to my girl, feels you might have done better for yourself socially. Gerald, rather embarrassed, begins to murmur some dissent, but Burling checks him. No, Gerald, that's all right. Don't blame her. She comes from an old county family, landed people and so forth, and so it's only natural. But what I wanted to say is, there's a fair chance that I might find my way into the next honours list. Just a knighthood, of course. Gerald. Oh, I say, congratulations. Burling. Thanks, but it's a bit too early for that. So don't say anything. But I've had a hint of it too. You see, I was a Lord Mayor there 2 years ago when royalty visited us, and I've always been regarded as a sound, useful party man. So, well, I gather there's a very good chance of a knighthood. So long as we behave ourselves, don't get into the police court. Or start a scandal, eh? Laughs complacently. Gerald laughs. You seem to be a nice, well-behaved family. Burling. We think we are. Gerald. So if that's the only obstacle, sir, I think you might as well accept my congratulations now. Burling. No, I couldn't do that. And don't say anything yet. Gerald. Not even to my mother. I know she would be delighted. Burling. Well, when she comes back, you might drop a hint to her, and you can promise her that we'll try to keep her out of trouble during the next few months. They both laugh. Eric enters. Eric. What's the joke? Started telling stories? Burling. No. Want another glass of port? Eric, sitting down. Yes, please. Takes the decanter and helps himself. Mother says we mustn't stay too long, but I don't think it matters. I left them talking about clothes again. You'd think a girl never had any clothes before she gets married. Women are potty about them. Burling. Yes, but you've got to remember, my boy, that clothes mean something quite different to a woman. Not just something to wear, and not only something to make them look prettier, but, well, a sort of sign or token of their self-respect. Gerald. That's true. Eric, eagerly. Yes, I remember. But he checks himself. Burling. Well, what do you remember? Eric, confused. Nothing. Berlin, nothing? Gerald, amused. Sounds a bit fishy to me. Berlin, taking it in same manner. Yes, you don't know what some of these boys get up to nowadays. More money to spend and time to spare than I had when I was Eric's age. They worked us hard in those days and kept us short of cash. Though even then, we broke out and had a bit of fun sometimes. Gerald, I'll bet you did. Berlin, solemnly. But this is the point. I don't want to lecture you two young fellow again. But what so many of you don't seem to understand now, when things are so much easier, is that a man has to make his own way, has to look after himself and his family too, of course, when he has one. And so long as he does that, he won't come to much harm. But the way some of these cranks talk and write now, you'd think everybody has to look after everybody else, as if we were all mixed up together, like bees in a hive, community and all that nonsense. But take my word for it, you youngsters, and I've learned in the good hard school of experience that a man has to mind his own business and look after himself and his own. And we hear the sharp ring of a front door bell. Berlin stops to listen. Eric, somebody's at the front door. Berlin, Edna'll answer it. Well, have another glass of port, Gerald, and then we'll join the ladies. That'll stop me giving you good advice. Eric, yes, you've piled it on a bit tonight, father. Berlin, special occasion, and feeling contented for once. I wanted you to have the benefit of my experience. Edna enters. Edna, please, sir, an inspector's called. Berlin, an inspector? What kind of inspector? Edna, a police inspector. He says his name's Inspector Gould. Berlin, don't know him. Does he want to see me? Edna, yes, sir. He says it's important. Berlin, all right, Edna. Show him in here. Give us some more light. Edna does, then goes out. I'm still on the bench. It may be something about a warrant. Gerald, lightly. Sure to be, unless Eric's been up to something, nodding confidentially to Berlin. And that would be awkward, wouldn't it? Berlin humorously. Very. Eric, who is uneasy, sharply. Here, what do you mean? Gerald, lightly. Only something we were talking about when you were out. A joke, really. Eric, still uneasy. Well, I don't think it's very funny. Berlin, sharply, staring at him. What's the matter with you? Eric, defiantly. Nothing. Edna, opening the door and announcing, Inspector Gould. The inspector enters, and Edna goes, closing the door after her. The inspector need not be a big man, but he creates at once an impression of massiveness, solidity, and purposefulness. He is a man in his 50s, dressed in a plain darkish suit of the period. He speaks carefully, weightily, and has a disconcerting habit of looking hard at the person he addresses before actually speaking. Inspector. Mr. Berlin. Berlin. Yes. Sit down, Inspector. Inspector, sitting. Thank you, sir. Berlin. Have a glass of port or a little whiskey. Inspector. No, thank you, Mr. Berlin. I'm on duty. Berlin. You're new, aren't you? Inspector. Yes, sir. Only recently transferred. Berlin. I thought you might be. I was an alderman for years and a Lord Mayor 2 years ago, and I'm still on the bench, so I know the Bromley police officers pretty well, and I thought I'd never seen you before. Inspector, quite so. Burling. Well, what can I do for you? Some trouble about warrants? Inspector, no, Mr. Burling. Burling, after a pause, with a touch of impatience. Well, what is it then? Inspector, I'd like some information, if you don't mind, Mr. Burling. 2 hours ago, young woman died in the infirmary. She'd been taken there this afternoon because she'd swallowed a lot of strong disinfectant. Burnt her inside out, of course. Eric, involuntarily. My God! Inspector, yes. She was in great agony. They did everything they could for her at the infirmary, but she died. Suicide, of course. Burling, rather impatiently. Yes. Horrible business, but I do not understand why you should come here, Inspector. Inspector continued through massively. I've been found to the room she had, and she'd left a letter there and a sort of diary, like a lot of these young women who get into these various kinds of trouble. She'd used more than one name, but her original name, her real name, was Eva Smith. Burling, thoughtfully. Eva Smith? Inspector, do you remember her, Mr. Burling? Burling, slowly. No. I seem to remember hearing that name, Eva Smith, somewhere, but it doesn't convey anything to me, and I don't see where I come into this. Inspector, she was employed in your works at one time. Burling, oh, that's it, is it? Well, with several hundred young women there, you know, and they keep changing. Inspector, this young woman, Eva Smith, was a bit out of the ordinary. I found a photograph of her in her lodgings. Perhaps you'd remember her from that. Inspector takes a photograph about postcard size out of his pocket and goes to Burling. Both Gerald and Eric rise to have a look at the photograph, but the inspector interposes himself between them and the photograph. They are surprised and rather annoyed. Burling stares hard and with recognition at the photograph, which the inspector then replaces in his pocket. Gerald, drawing annoyance. Any particular reason why I shouldn't see this girl's photograph, Inspector? Inspector coolly, looking hard at him. There might be. Eric, and the same applies to me, I suppose. Inspector, yes. Gerald, I can't imagine what it could be. Eric, neither can I. Burling, and I must say, I agree with them, Inspector. Inspector, it's the way I like to go to work. One person and one line of inquiry at a time. Otherwise, there's a muddle. Burling, I see. Sensible, really. Moves restlessly, then turns. You've had enough of that port, Eric. The inspector is watching Burling, and now Burling notices him. Inspector, I think you remember Eva Smith now, don't you, Mr. Burling? Burling, yes, I do. She was one of my employees, and then I discharged her. Eric, is that why she committed suicide? When was this, father? Burling, just keep quiet, Eric, and don't get excited. This girl left us nearly 2 years ago. Let me see. It must have been in the early autumn of 1910. Inspector, yes, end of September, 1910. Burling, that's right. Gerald, look here, sir. Wouldn't you rather I was out of this? Burling, I don't mind your being here. Gerald, and I'm sure you've no objection, have you, Inspector? Perhaps I ought to explain first that this is Mr. Gerald Croft, The son of Sir George Croft, you know, Crofts Limited. Inspector. Mr. Gerald Croft, eh? Mr. Gerald Croft, eh? Berling. Yes, incidentally, we've been modestly celebrating his engagement to my daughter Sheila. Inspector. I see. Mr. Croft is going to marry Mrs. Sheila Berling. Gerald, smiling. I hope so. Inspector, gravely. Then I prefer you to stay. Gerald, surprised. Oh, all right. Berling, somewhat impatiently. Look, there's nothing mysterious or scandalous about this business, at least not so far as I'm concerned, and it's a perfectly straightforward case. And as it happened more than 18 months ago, nearly 2 years ago, obviously it has nothing whatever to do with the wretched girl's suicide. Eh, Inspector? Inspector. No, sir.